This podcast is brought to you from the My Perks Lounge here in the Vancouver Mall in Vancouver, Washington State. Learn more at shopvancouvermall.com. Hello and welcome to the Reconsider Reality podcast. I'm your host, Tate Weaver, joined today by my co-host, Spencer McCuddy. We're missing our second co-host, Max, today. He wasn't able to make it. He's working on some real estate stuff, so it's just Spencer and I today holding it down. But because of that, we have a slightly different layout. Let us know what you guys think about this. I think it turned out pretty cool. I actually really like this format. We're a little bit closer together, too, so I think that's cool. So I definitely recommend you guys watch this as opposed to listen to it. But no matter how you're viewing this podcast, it's going to be a good episode. Today's episode is about Area 51, flying saucers within the U.S. government's possession, and one of America's most famous whistleblowers named Bob Lazar. So, low-level breakdown just of who he is and what the situation is to catch you up to speed. I know, Spencer, I know you know a little bit about it already.
I know you've seen the Joe Rogan documentary specifically.
Bob Lazar did an episode of Joe Rogan's podcast with him, and then another guy made a documentary about him.
Oh.
And this guy's been on other podcasts. Yeah, Joe Rogan didn't make the documentary. It was Joe Rogan did a whole 2-hour episode with him. It was by this guy named Jeremy Corbell, who is a UFOologist.
It's on Netflix, or?
It's no, it's on a couple of others. Like I streamed it on Tubi, which is a streaming site I didn't know about, but I had to look up to see where it was.
I watched a little bit of Joe Rogan's.
You watched some of the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, I think the podcast is maybe even better than the documentary. No offense, Jeremy, if he ever sees this, but the guy that directed the documentary. But so Bob Lazar was a man who worked at Area 51, more specifically an area within the Nevada test site. It's a massive area within the Nevada desert where they test nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, all sorts of stuff for the U.S. government. There's Area 51, and there's a subsidiary area next to Area 51 on the campus, if you will, called Area S4, and that's where Bob was. He was there from 88 to 89, 1988, 89. He was there for only about 6 months, though, and he claims, we're going to speak as if everything is factual, but just remember, if you're listening to this, that these are all claims from Bob Lazar. A lot of them are very, very hard to confirm, because
we're taking his word for it.
We're taking his word for it. Yeah. And you can decide whether or not you believe the information here.
This is on his account, and he barely even knew a lot. He didn't even know that much either.
No, he was only exposed to a very small section of what he claims to have been there in Area 51. So he only speaks on what he claims to know, which is one of the things that makes this story so interesting.
Not a lot, but still, a lot of info to take in.
It's still plenty to take in.
In the entirety, there was so much that was going on that he seemed to reference to, but he only knew so little.
So Bob worked in this facility within the Nevada test site near Area 51 in the Nevada desert in 1988, 1989 for about 6 months, and he claims that he worked on an alien propulsion system. He says that this Nevada test site called S4 had 9 alien spacecrafts in their possession. So he claims that the U.S. government has 9 alien spacecrafts in the Nevada desert. Just in one location, we have 9 spacecrafts, apparently. And he was sectioned and commissioned to work on one spacecraft, and specifically the propulsion system of said spacecraft. And he said that everything was so compartmentalized, no questions were allowed to be asked. There was no cross-referencing or working between different teams. He was on propulsion with one other guy. There were others, he says, that were on metallurgy, studying the composition, the metal that made the spacecraft.
They would only walk by each other, right? Like passing through.
I don't even know about that. Maybe.
They would talk to he would only report to one higher up.
He would report to one higher up, and that higher up would then report that to somebody else. So Bob would never even speak to his direct supervisor.
Which is very inefficient, by the way.
Definitely.
From what he even said too, but just when you're in science, I mean, you want to have minds thinking together.
Sure, you want
new ideas,
creative collaboration.
Yeah, and this is totally different. Totally the converse of that.
The reason they do that, Bob says, and I agree, is for sake of international security. If the U.S. government really does have 9 spacecrafts in their possession, and it's a secret, who knows whether or not any other country in the world possesses even one.
Even one, yeah.
It begs the question whether or not they do. If we have 9, how many are actually out there on Earth? But the fact that we have 9, and we can't confirm that anybody has any at all, we might have the biggest secret of mankind within
Yeah,
our
yeah.
within our United States
I wonder
land
if they're
area.
all found inside America, within the boundaries of America, or if they went to other countries to snatch it
Who
before it was
knows?
found.
And Bob doesn't know that because again he wasn't allowed to ask questions at all. But he said that during his time at Area S4, he heard something about one of the spacecrafts being recovered from, at least one of them being recovered from an archaeological dig, which means that futuristic alien technology that they have at Area 51 S4 is actually ancient.
That's crazy.
So however many
How
thousands
long
of
it
years
had
ago
been.
the aliens synthesized it, we're still not there.
So where are they now? Like, where's their technology at now?
Probably in
where-
like the 10th dimension, dude. I don't know.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, seriously, seriously.
And you'll get into this too, because I know you know a lot more about this, but I mean, the technology that he was even researching, it wasn't ancient to us. It was incredibly advanced. Like,
Exactly.
you would look at it and you would have no idea where to start. No idea. They didn't know how it worked. They were just basically playing around with it as if you were playing with a toy dumpster truck.
Yes, and that's a good point. That brings us back to his story in chronological order. So let's break it down again from a basic level. How it started was in 88-89, he worked at Area S4, and he was commissioned to work on one spacecraft, and specifically the propulsion system of said spacecraft. And his job was to try and reverse engineer the technology of the propulsion system and see if it could be replicated with current human technology, Earth-based technology. So he claims that the propulsion system was an antimatter, anti-gravity reactor. So it produced its own field of anti-gravity, which is insane because we have nothing on Earth that produces gravity. We understand at a very, very basic level as humans what gravity is. We understand the effect that it has on things. We understand that it can dilate time, that it increased gravity adds the sensation of mass. Decreased gravity, the inverse, but we cannot synthesize gravity. We cannot create gravity. The only way that you could produce gravity is by putting a bunch of mass together, and then gravity, comes into play just as a byproduct, but we're not synthesizing gravity.
Yeah.
But this reactor apparently was doing just that. It was creating gravity, anti-gravity, meaning he said that
And
when
this is how they moved around. This is how they were able to fly around.
Kind of, and I want to give an analogy for that for whoever's listening. But he says that it was a sphere like a basketball, and when it was on, you couldn't touch it. You could try and put your hands towards it, and it would push your hands away. Kind of like trying to push two magnets together, the opposing sides. When they you can feel the magnetic energy pushing away on both ends. He said it was like that. You could not touch it. The more you push, the harder it pushes back at you. So you could not touch it. It was effectively producing anti-gravity, which nothing on this planet can do. Nothing now in 2020 that we know, in 2022 that we know of. Nothing back in the 1980s.
That we know of.
Yeah.
You never know where military technology
where they
might
are
be.
now.
Yeah,
for sure.
A lot of it's classified, but that's a reach. That's
as far as
a reach.
the scientific community is concerned, as far as the general public knows, though, that this is still pretty far outside of what we can fathom.
When was this documentary released? When was this stuff released?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. So Bob worked at the place, like I keep saying, in 88 to 89, the beginning of 89, the end of 88, and after his 6 months there, he was booted from the program for a couple of reasons. And he started telling his friends. He started telling his friends about all of this, all the things that he saw, all the things that he read through briefings when he was in the program. And he gets caught showing his friends some of this stuff. And they tell him they're going to kill him, all this stuff. And thankfully they never do. Maybe because he releases all this information to the public.
Yeah.
And the reason
Did he
since
threaten that he would release a lot if they
I think it was the opposite.
I
think that they threatened to kill him, so he says, "This is my safety cushion. I'm going to go ahead and release all of this stuff. That way, if they off me, it's no clear coincidence. Obviously, that stuff is true. It validates it if they kill him, having released all this. So that would be a crazy coincidence. So he considered that to be a safety net. Once they started making these threats to him, he goes to a reporter journalist that he knew in Las Vegas, which is the nearest city to the Nevada test site. And his name is George Knapp. And he goes to this guy, George Knapp, in this local radio station, and he tells him about all this stuff, and then they break the story on the air.
And this wasn't the guy that was on the documentary with, not the
George
podcast
Knapp
with
actually
Joe
was
Rogan.
he was not on
No.
he was not on the podcast. Yeah, he is in the documentary though, which you should watch. So yeah, they break the story, and that was 30 years ago. One thing that Bob said that he may have overheard regarding the project where they would commission scientists to try and reverse engineer these spacecrafts is that they would work on the project for a while and see how far they could get with current human-based technology. When they would dead end, when they couldn't get any farther, they would put it away for a while, they would cease funding, and then they would reboot the project 10 years later to see where human material science has gotten to and see if they could make any more progress. So see, he said that he had heard that they would reboot the project every 10 years, but it wasn't a continuous thing. Funding would ebb and flow for it depending on where human material science was. So they would get as far as they could in the 1980s, and then they would stow that away and then pick it back up in the 1990s and see.
88, 89, late 80s, right?
Yeah, it was late 80s, but I don't know when they started and when they stopped it. Who knows? Bob doesn't know.
Exactly.
Bob doesn't know.
People before him too. I mean,
He probably there was at least one more person before him. He knows that, but he doesn't know. Nobody knows how long they've had the spacecrafts there, if they've been in America's possession for many decades before. They could have had it,
not started funding for a while. You never know.
I'd like to propose that America has probably had at least one in their position for at least 3 or 4 decades before Bob was there.
Bro, that's insane.
Reason for that is the Roswell, New Mexico crash was in the 1950s. The government covered that up and tried to say that it was a weather balloon. Then many years later, they tried to say that it was a Russian spy craft, but it was totally human-based technology. But eyewitnesses swore up and down that it was an alien spacecraft and that they saw alien corpses on the ground. And it was recovered by the U.S. government so fast.
How is there no pictures out on the internet right now with this stuff?
Of Roswell?
The aliens, alien airships, whatever. How are there, with how media is today, how are there no leaked documents?
Well, there definitely are, but it's the validity of said documents. It's really hard to validate them. I think that one of the biggest things that the government banks on these days is the ability to write something off as being false. Bob in the late 1980s, as soon as he got booted out of the program, like I said, he was showing his friends stuff that he had found out. Like I said, he saw the spacecrafts fly. And apparently they would test the spacecrafts out in the Nevada desert every Wednesday because statistically Wednesdays were the days that they had the fewest amount of traffic on the roads.
And this is way different than it is now because they've expanded Area 51, the boundaries.
Yeah, they have.
From which you can view the actual area. So back then you could actually be pretty relatively close to it because it was all desert. Yeah. Now, majority of the boundary is part of it.
They took like 90 more miles or something like that. I don't know, But back in the day, they said that Wednesdays were the days that historically had the least traffic. So those were the days where they were least likely to have civilians spot their spacecrafts that they were flying. So on Wednesdays, they would test this spacecraft. They would put the reactor back in it and then fly it and do different maneuvers with it to try and learn more about it. After Bob was booted from the program, he would take his friends, and he had the test flight schedule. And he would go, he would take his friends, and 8 o'clock at night or whatever, he would go.
I think they changed it
out in the desert
after getting rid of someone. We changed the We changed the.
I was just thinking about the safe passcode at the store.
But then someone leaves, they want it done instantly. This guy's still got the schedule.
Big flaw.
For an airship.
Big flaw, if that's true. But apparently, Bob Lazar says that he still knew the test schedule, and they were sticking to that. So he took some of his friends out to the desert, and he told them, these guys booted me out of the program. They've been following me around, so I just want to, for my personal security, show you guys what it is that's been happening. You guys don't have to believe me, understand how crazy this sounds. Just come with me on Wednesday night, and I'm going to show you guys what's been happening. He says that he took a bunch of friends out to the desert, and he showed them the spacecraft, and apparently there it was flying. And he says that he did it a few times, and then finally on the third time they got caught. Yeah.
Weren't lasers pointing at them or something like that?
There was a scope, like a night vision scope, and one guy that was spying on him dropped it, and then it rolled over towards Bob, and so they just turned on the lights, and apparently there were a bunch of people all around Bob. Yeah.
Who are they hiring?
I don't know, dude. I don't know. The fact that they still had the same,
fumbled a gun.
They still had the same flight schedule after kicking a guy out of this super secret operation.
They had some noobs for Area 51. Yeah. That's funny.
But what I was getting at is Bob said that they had a camcorder out there and they were recording it, but he said that the footage was from the 80s and it doesn't look very good and it just looks like a red dot bopping through the sky. So point is, I think that real footage of the shit actually probably does exist. But one, when you watch it, it might not be impressive, and two, when you watch it, it's really hard to validate whether or not it's real. And something like that is so easy to replicate in CGI these days and make it look good. It's hard to say whether or not it's real.
That's true.
You might see a completely real UFO clip on the internet, but have no no means of deciphering whether or not it is real.
There's been a couple I've seen that look relatively could be real.
Yeah.
No, could be, with how media is right now, with how editing is right now. But
it's hard to say.
yeah.
But there's clearly a lot of stuff out there, but it's just masked by a lot of fakes, and it's impossible to distinguish between them. And I think that works to the government's advantage.
And who knows what's being taken down as well?
Yeah, for sure.
How on top of it they are, especially nowadays.
They might be.
Yeah.
They might be. Yeah. So Bob was there, and he tried to reverse engineer this antimatter, anti-gravity reactor. And he said that the guy that was there prior to him, he got the impression that the scientist that was there prior to him died in some kind of horrific accident, and they needed a replacement, and that's why they brought in Bob.
What was he doing before?
What was Bob doing before?
Yeah.
So this is a good aspect of the story that I forgot to get into. But apparently, after Bob was booted out of this program, and he started whistleblowing, telling people all about it, they try to just remove his record from the entirety of the public eye. When he told this reporter, when he tried to initially break the story and begin whistleblowing, he went to that reporter George Knapp in Las Vegas, and George Knapp, being an investigative journalist, he wanted to validate everything before he makes it before he airs it on his channel. I don't know if this guy's full of shit. I'm not just going to air this. I'm going to investigate and look into this guy Bob Lazar's background. Bob said that he got degrees in physics and something else. I think it was at Caltech. He said that he worked at a research facility in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he said a couple of other things.
All of those gone though, huh?
George Knapp, this journalist, he called Los Alamos. He said that they had no record of Bob.
Wow.
He called the colleges that apparently issued degrees to Bob, and they had no record of Bob going there. But then he also called the hospital that Bob was born at, and there was no record of Bob having been born.
His entire life was taken away.
Yeah,
on
yeah,
record.
yeah. It was as if someone was trying to make him completely invisible.
Yeah. That's insane.
And that's odd because you could lie about college and you could lie about where you work, but you can't lie about having been born.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Bob, who's the journalist?
George Knapp.
George Knapp, yeah. George Knapp dug deeper, and he found a phone book from the Los Alamos research facility in New Mexico,
with his
from
name.
the years that Bob was said to have worked there, and Bob was listed as a research scientist at Los Alamos.
They forgot to take that off.
Yeah. Furthermore,
their own employment center, but not
because they issued a bunch of copies of the book, and it's just out there, so
Yeah.
they couldn't remove everything as hard as they probably tried.
Drop in the scope.
I know. What are these guys doing? What
Yeah.
are these guys doing? But George found a phone book that had Bob Lazar listed as a research scientist at the Los Alamos National Research Facility. So he was able to validate. He was able to verify that Bob Lazar worked there. Furthermore, there was a newspaper article with Bob on the cover before he worked at Area 51.
That's cool.
And then this is kind of the reason that Bob got the job too. Bob worked at Los Alamos, this super high level. Even Los Alamos is a really high level research facility. They do nuclear weapon testing, all sorts of different stuff there. And Bob is an intrinsically a really smart dude. He has a particle accelerator at his house, or he did at the time.
Oh, wow.
And he fitted his Honda that he owned with a jet engine. He made his own jet engine car by hand. And he would drive that to work every day, and he would drive that around town. So he got really popular around his neighborhood.
Funny.
And the local newspaper put out an article about Bob, with Bob on the cover of the newspaper article.
For doing this car?
For doing the jet engine car,
Okay.
yeah. And they talked about him working at Los Alamos as well. So they've also found a newspaper article about Bob working at this place that he said he worked at, even though the place itself had no record. And then Bob said that he had degrees from these universities. These universities had no record of him. So
did George Knapp believe him after he found?
I
his
think
employment
George
records?
Knapp says that he fully believes Bob now.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't feel like most people would if he's got a documentary
Yeah.
and a podcast on Joe Rogan.
So the thing that's so compelling about Bob's story is not all of it, of course, because it's super hard to verify all of his claims, but some of the things that he said that would be really hard to fabricate have come true. He said that this anti-gravity reactor that was the system of propulsion for this spacecraft was powered by a stabilized version of element 115, which us humans call moscovium. It was first synthesized, I could be totally wrong, but like early 2000s, I want to say it was 2003, I'm pretty damn sure, by a joint Russian-American scientific effort. And they synthesized it, and its half-life was super short, and it just decayed immediately because all elements have a stable isotope and an unstable isotope. Elements can be synthesized in a stable capacity, and they can just hang out. Or if you don't synthesize it correctly, it can be unstable, and it will decay. It'll just disappear. Us humans have been able to figure out element 115 for a fraction of a second. We synthesize it, and then it immediately decays, and it's gone.
Made it real.
Yeah, but
enough to make it real.
We validated that element 115 does exist, so we named it Moscovium because I think the joint American-Russian effort was in Moscow, Russia, or maybe near. So we were able to synthesize it for at least long enough to prove that it exists. So we named it, and we put it on the periodic table.
And before this, Bob Lazar said that
the
element was a thing.
He said that it was powered by the 115th element, which we don't have a name for, but there's a 115th element, and that's what powers this. And it's in a stabilized form. And he said that it was like a glowing blue vial. It was stabilized, and you could just see it, which is crazy. But point is that Bob has made a number of claims that have been validated as true. Basically, the claims that he made that could be validated have been validated. With relative ease. It's like the thing about the main thing, the spacecrafts within U.S. governmental possession. They're not just going to come out and be like, yo, we do. We have 9. We have 9 spacecraft. Now we got 10. We got 10. We found another one.
Yeah.
They're not going to say that.
Point for Gryffindor.
Yeah. But the 115th element, Moscovium, that's not inherently a property of the U.S. government. People around the world are experimenting, and they finally synthesized it. So that was something that became public knowledge.
Scientific evolution.
That was something that became public knowledge. So that's how they were able to prove that. But considering how many things that Bob Lazar has said that we have been able to validate, it lends credibility to the rest of what he said.
Definitely.
And it gives everybody that hears the story more reason to believe that it probably is true.
Lucky guessing random stuff, making up random stuff.
Not to mention that, but he's been incredibly consistent over the 30 years he's told his story. He hasn't deviated, he hasn't changed, he hasn't contradicted.
Very true.
It's the same story the whole time he's told it, which lends even more credibility in my eyes.
Definitely, yeah. I've watched a little bit, and it does seem very credible. From what I've watched.
Yeah,
I would say.
He seems like an honest guy.
Especially since, the government came out with, recently they had made that act that released a bunch of findings on alien technology, right?
Something like that. Yeah, the Freedom of Information Act has them release all sorts of stuff these days, and I've been meaning to look more into it because I know that a lot of stuff came out in 2020 when COVID was just overtaking the media, and a lot of people speculate that they released it at that time for a good reason because it would be blown over by all the COVID media headlines. But I still haven't looked into a lot of that stuff.
I've been meaning to too. Yeah, I haven't either. Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, but I mean, grand moral of the story here is that the U.S. government is working on a lot of stuff that they don't release to the public, and whether it comes out via a whistleblower or the Freedom of Information Act 3 decades later, whatever it might be, they work on stuff that is significantly ahead of our time in terms of the technology that we have available to us.
And if this is 30 years ago,
it keeps begging the question: what the fuck are they doing now?
What the hell do they have now?
Seriously.
What are they working on now? If they've allowed this stuff to be released, because what kind of player, if you have a deck of cards hidden from other countries, you're not going to release all your cards. You're not going to show all your cards. With this Freedom Act, they're only going to release what they can, enough to
they're not going to
give people
reveal
what they
a card
want
until after it could have harmed them.
Yeah.
If they're showing a card face up, it's because it's no longer
necessary
relevant
to them. Yeah, those 9 alien technology, or at least, which begs, which makes me believe that maybe they've found a way to replicate. If they've been able to, no, this is him being a whistleblower.
Right, he broke this whole story.
Yeah, this isn't what they released.
Yeah. But, I mean, other stuff like the previous episode that we did on the gateway astral projection techniques from the CIA.
If this is being released, it means they've been able to utilize it.
They've been able to utilize it for one, and probably other countries' governments have looked into it as well. If they're willing to put this out to the public, the U.S. has probably gotten so far with astral projection methods that it's no longer, we don't need to keep it a secret that we can do it at a basic level because we're so far past it.
Yeah, this is below our pay grade.
Yeah, it's below their pay grade. Exactly. I want to get into a little bit more about what Bob said he saw and what he learned about on his first day at Area S4. The way that he said it would work is that he would go to this little airport, and he would get on a small plane, like a municipal, like a passenger plane, with a couple of people, and then they would fly him to a remote location where a bus would meet up with him and a couple of other individuals. A bus with blacked out windows, so you couldn't see exactly where you were being taken to, and then the bus would take you to your final location, and that was Area S4. He knew that it was within the Nevada test site in the Nevada desert, but whereabouts exactly, no idea.
And he didn't have his phone with him or anything like that, right?
There weren't mobile phones back then.
True.
Yeah.
Even if it was the bigger phones or whatever,
there might have been those back then. I don't know.
Or at least something relevant. But he couldn't have any
definitely
technology on him.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it wouldn't have
been
been allowed.
It's not 2000. It's not 2010.
Yeah, I think there might have been the giant phones back then where you pull the antenna out. Those personal phones might have existed. I don't know. But anyways, yeah. So they would take him out to this remote location, and on his very first day, they sat him down for a number of briefings. And he said initially he didn't really believe them, and he knew this was going to be a really high security job with a lot of confidential information. So he didn't know whether or not the briefings he was reading were true, or if they were giving him factual information with a bunch of bullshit spewed within. That way they could trace back who was whistleblowing, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Let's say they give a document specifically to Bob Lazar, and it says we're working with element 115, and that's true, but they also say element 115 comes from our 11 spacecrafts. They don't actually have 11 spacecrafts, they're just saying that. That way, if Bob Lazar whistleblows and he goes,
we only have 9.
He knows, they would be able to trace it back to him because they fed that false information to him. So he didn't know whether or not the information he was being fed was true, or if that was some security measure, or if they were going to test him on the knowledge he retained. He didn't know what it was. But all of the information he read in briefings that pertained to his specific spacecraft did end up being true, which to him he said lends credibility that all the briefings were probably true, though he cannot validate that, and he stresses that he can't validate. He says that that's probably the case. So some of the other things that he read were that alien races have had involvement in the human species for over 10,000 years.
What?
And that apparently is known to elite humans within the government. That's apparently known, that aliens have had involvement with the human race for 10,000 years or more. Yeah. Which begs the question, DNA altering, alteration to the evolutionary process. It really makes you think what they've been doing all this time. What involvement they've had in ancient societies. Maybe they built the pyramids. It really makes you think.
Maybe those theories are correct.
Seriously,
to an extent. You never know.
If they've been here for 10,000 years.
And he read this in a
briefing.
In a briefing.
And he couldn't validate whether or not this one was true because he didn't do anything.
But it was on paper.
It was on the same paper that had stuff that was true about the spacecraft he worked on.
What the fuck?
So
10,000 years?
Yeah.
How are there no journals of how are there no I mean, this could all be made up as well, but how are there no ancient texts?
Well, so there's ancient text everywhere. Ancient text everywhere that talks about people coming from the sky, gods coming from the sky, gods coming from underground, gods coming from under the ocean, everywhere. But just like current day media, it's really easy to write that off as being fake.
How many times have the Bible?
These people lived in caves. Why would you believe them that there's ancient people? They shit in the same place that they would eat. Why are we gonna believe them when they say that star people came down and helped them build pyramids? So there's just no credibility in the eye of the public with that. But there's tons of ancient scripts. But it also begs the question: how long have humans been making an effort to conceal these things? I mean, the Library of Alexandria, one of the biggest concentrations of knowledge in the ancient world, was burned down for some reason, and we speculate why that might have been, but historians weren't around back then. Why was the Library of Alexandria burned down? And then we've also got the Vatican Library within the Vatican, currently over in Europe, that you can't access. What's in there? Does that have documents pertaining to the origin of man, what the afterlife is, where people come from? Like that stuff could be in there. Nobody can access that except for people like the Pope. So we might have documents today that we're just restricted from seeing.
This is a little off topic. This is kind of just my thought. But dude, last time after the podcast, I thought of this. But talking about this stuff, doesn't it just make you, like, in a sense, want to just drop everything and go explore, go research,
Dude, it
go
is
learn
it is
everything you
so
possibly
hard
can.
for me to learn about things like this
And
and,
not wanna
personally believe them, because
Yeah.
I do believe these things.
Mhm.
Maybe I want to believe them.
Maybe you want to
but
believe, but why wouldn't you want to believe that there's
for me,
a
there's
gr-
enough
greater
irrefutable
cause?
evidence that
Yeah.
a lot of this stuff
Yeah.
has got to be true.
if enough theories are out there, there's got to be a reason for these theories.
Yeah.
There's got to be a reason for why these came up. The first theory that ever came out on aliens, where the hell do you think it came from?
Yeah.
No one just came up with a green little creature.
So learning about these things, it's so hard for me to go to work, ring a customer up at the register and be like, "Do you have a phone number set up with us here?"
Right.
And in the back of my
Right.
mind, I'm going, I know where man came from. We have 9 alien spacecrafts in our possession that come from the Zeta
And
Reticuli
I'm
star
dropping it all to
constellation.
sell this T-shirt to this
Yeah,
customer.
And I'm scanning these items. Do you want a bag, man? And he goes, I don't know. How much is it? Well, it's 8 cents.
That's too much.
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so no bag? Yeah, man, no bag. I know what happened before the Big Bang.
Yeah, yeah.
The information's always in the back of my mind pestering me. Definitely is. Definitely
I've thought about
is.
this the last couple of times. It's just crazy.
Yeah, definitely to carry
Uh-huh.
around is from what I believe to be true knowledge, just to carry this
Yeah.
around and then.
Why wouldn't you want it to be true knowledge? Why wouldn't
Yeah.
you want to, like, screw school, screw all
if
all
this
these
stuff is
everyday
real?
things?
No shit.
Why wouldn't you
No
want to
shit.
learn all these possible alternatives to what we believe to be our reality
No.
and learn what's really going on behind the scenes, if it's all true?
Yeah. Another thing that Bob said was within his briefings, another thing that pertained to his specific craft, but that he wasn't able to validate because how would he be able to, was that that specific spacecraft that he had came from the Zeta Reticuli star constellation. Not only that, but specifically planet S3, which is the 3rd planet within the Zeta Reticuli star constellation. Apparently, the Zeta Reticuli star system is a binary star system, meaning that it has 2 suns rotating each other.
Oh,
So any planet in that star system would have 2 suns in its sky, which is really cool to think about.
Yeah.
But apparently that spacecraft that he worked on came from the 3rd planet from those suns within the Zeta Reticuli star constellation. He said the way that they learned that, he has no idea,
Yeah.
but that's what was said in his briefing.
Oh.
That specific craft they got from a star system 30 light years away, and they got it from the 3rd planet in that star system rotating their suns, which is insane. So
Insane.
apparently that's proof that that is an inhabited alien planet.
Yeah.
If these other things that Bob is saying is true, then why wouldn't that be?
Yeah, exactly.
So that would mean not only that we have alien spacecrafts here on Earth, but we know definitively of at least a planet that has alien life. That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. And in the grand scheme of things, it is close, but when you consider the universe as a whole, which is ever expanding, it's still pretty far away. The Zeta Reticuli star system is some 30 odd light years away.
Okay.
I mean, to conceptualize that is still infinitely far for us.
Yeah.
If you're going the speed of light every second of every day for 30 years straight, you'll get there. Assuming you're traveling directly from point A to point B, you're not bending time space and just moving from one point to another.
So say again how they found this out, how they learned of this?
Yeah, who
Just
knows?
from what he's read?
Who knows? Yeah, Bob just said that he was going to be working
the
on.
fuck?
He was told he was going to be working on one specific spacecraft, and one of the pages had a briefing that detailed information specifically on that spacecraft, and it said that that spacecraft hailed from the Zeta Reticuli star system, from planet S3, which is the 3rd planet from the suns of that star system. It didn't say how they knew that or how they got it, and none of us know how they got those other 9 spacecrafts, but apparently at least one was from an archaeological dig, which is just insane.
Seriously?
To think an archaeological dig as in what would be ancient. It's been sitting on our soil for long
who
enough
knows
that it's
how
been buried.
freaking long. Yeah.
I mean, many thousands, probably tens of thousands of years. So whatever civilization that came from, it's just got to be forgotten technology, something that doesn't even exist
hell?
anymore.
What
But
the
for us,
hell?
it's still future technology.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah,
makes me
seriously.
wonder how far that civilization must be ahead of us.
Mhm.
How many years in terms of technological advancement are they ahead of us? Which ultimately makes me wonder, like, how much earlier these civilizations started, or if they've just evolved at a more rapid pace.
Yeah,
you know.
just maybe they're smarter people, or
Well, maybe,
Better
but
resources
also
or- I don't know.
the universe has been around for billions of years, and after the Earth terraforming itself for so long via being cold and frozen, and then just volcanoes erupting, and then atmosphere finally forming, organisms coming out of the ocean and developing vertebrae, and then walking upright, and then we're bipedal beings, fucking just out of nowhere. Earth's conditions became habitable when they decided to. It just happened, and then life started forming. It just happened at the pace that it happened. It was just dictated by possibly nothing. It just happened. So who's to say that conditions didn't just happen to be correct in other planets, in other star systems, possibly 1 billion or 2 billion years before us? Can you imagine a species that evolved 2 billion years before us?
Seriously.
That's insane.
Where they're at now, just what they've got on us.
100 years ago, and I've told you this, but the viewer is going to find this real interesting, but 100 years ago, in the neighborhood where my parents' house is, you would tie up a horse.
Yeah.
And I know I've told you this before, but and cars existed back then, but I don't think that the Ford Model T hit the mass market until like the 1920s or something like that. Or maybe even later than that. Like automobiles were out and steam engines existed and steam engine cars existed, but they hadn't hit the mass market, and they were really just for high-level consumers that made a lot of money and things like that. General day-to-day middle and low-class individuals would still ride horses.
And just to even think that people were tying up horses on the street instead of parking a car.
No, seriously. So 100 years ago,
You'd think someone's weird doing that now.
In the 1920s, when my parents' neighborhood was constructed and their house was constructed, they on the curbs they had horse rings, where you would pull up to the curb with your horse, and you would tie up your horse so you could go inside. And all of those houses in that area, including my parents' house, they don't have driveways; they have carriageways.
Yeah,
they're not nearly as wide
narrow
as a regular driveway. It only fits one vehicle at a time, and it's because it was designed for a horse and carriage, which also a horse and carriage or horse and buggy, whatever you want to call it, is significantly longer than a car. So that's why it's so narrow and so long.
Yeah.
My parents' driveway can fit like 4 cars back to back to back, but no 2 cars next to each other. And it's because you'd have a horse and reins and then a buggy behind it. And that's how that house was intended to be pulled up to, was in a horse and buggy. And in 100 years, less than that, we've got Teslas. We've got vehicles that run on renewable energy.
Self-driving cars, yeah.
Yeah, we've technologically evolved to that point in less than a century. So imagine if there was a species that was
They've forgotten us how long before us.
let's say a billion years before us. Imagine where they would be now.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't.
I mean, now they've got alien technology that can use gravitational pull to move their ships.
I mean, that might be the most benign, boring yawn technology for a species that's been around that long.
They could be like, bro, that was like 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, that
was so long ago.
They might not even know. Like, how did they even know to make element?
We don't even use materialistic items anymore.
No, yeah, they might just float everywhere.
Yeah.
Who knows? But I like to theorize that whatever alien race used the spacecraft that Bob worked on and had element 115 can't be more than a couple hundred up to a few singular thousand years ahead of us in terms of technological advancement. I don't think they could possibly be more than a few thousand years ahead of us. Reason for that is, no, we do not have a synthesized, stabilized version of element 115.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
That hasn't been long.
But humans did synthesize it. If only for a second, we still made it. So we were able to figure out how to make the thing that they are using, just not at the same level that they do.
So how long do you think until they could maybe make it stable?
I mean, maybe 100 years or less.
Yeah.
I really don't know where technology is
at
right now.
I wonder what other elements there are that you could compare it to, from where they made the element to making it an actual useful element,
What do you mean?
Like let's say they made an element in the past, and now they're able to use it for technology, whatever. How long that gap was until they were able to use it for other items, as in
from them having synthesized it for the first time, like us, to being able to stabilize it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I have no idea. Yeah, I wonder if they did it faster than us. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, point is, we can't make it the way that they make it, but we were able to make it in 2003. So that species cannot be more than a couple hundred to a couple thousand years ahead of us. But with that said, That species, according to Bob's documents, was 30 light years away, which is one of the closest star systems to us in the universe. It's one of the in the entire Milky Way where we're inhabiting. It's one of the closest star systems to us, and they can't be too far ahead of us considering we're catching on to them. That means that there could very easily be other species from farther away that have already gotten here or have been here or no longer have interest here, that are maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years ahead of us in terms of technological advancement and physical advancement too. So it's crazy to think, but I think that there's probably a number of different species that have interacted here.
If Bob, there's one other, why couldn't there be one other?
Right. Why couldn't there be more? Yeah. If one that is only a couple hundred to couple thousand years ahead of us has been able to reach it,
how is there only one planet in the universe that's habitable?
Well, yeah. I mean, the odds dictate that it's just more likely than not that there's other life out there. The general public probably doesn't believe that other races have made contact with us, but I think 60 to 70% of Americans believe that it's possible that they're out there, because statistically speaking, it just makes sense for there to be life out there.
Exactly.
But Bob said himself that one day when he was at Area S4, the spacecraft that he worked on was kept in an aircraft hangar, and it was a really long hangar separated by hangar doors. One day he goes in and he says that all of the hangar doors are up, so he could see all the way through the aircraft hangar, and he saw all 9 of the spacecrafts. And he said that they were varying significantly in shape and size and color and everything, as if maybe they came from different species or
different species or different time periods.
Different time periods for that same species. But they were very different, so they obviously didn't come from the same place at the same time. He said that there was one that was super flat, like you wouldn't be able to stand in it. The one that he was in was
because they said because they estimated that the people riding those ships were about 3 feet tall.
Yep. He said even the one that he was in, you have to be standing in the very center to be able to stand upright. But he said there was one that was even flatter than that, like you might not even be able to lay down in it.
Wow.
He said there was one that was shaped like a Jello mold, and I'm not sure what shape that dictates, but I would assume like a rounded off trapezoid, like I think that's what a Jello mold would be if I think of like freestanding Jello. But that's a very different shape too. He said that they were all just different shapes and different sizes. So I wonder if we have recovered technology from a couple of different species, which is really cool to think about. And then it begs the question, like, what are they? You've heard all these theories that seem really, really, really far-fetched just from the general public's eye. Like, you hear of, like, the gray aliens, the classic ones that are 2 to 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
And then you hear about green ones, and then you hear about aliens that look like people. And then you hear about reptilian aliens, and it's like, it really makes you wonder, like, what is out there?
Yeah.
And moreover, what is out there that has established contact with us? That's what's really crazy. So I wonder. I wonder what is here or what has been here that some select humans within our race have knowledge of but are repressing from the majorities. I really wonder.
And it sucks to think that they are suppressing it from the rest of the humankind.
Yeah.
That it has to be a secret.
Yeah.
It's got to be a living theory for us.
Yeah, Bob says that he considers it a crime against humanity. The fact that they withheld this information.
I think so too.
I completely agree.
They're using it to beat other countries.
Yeah,
definitely. To have more info, to have more secrets, to have more weapons than other countries in case of war. Whatever.
In order to do that, not only do they have to hide it from different countries, but they have to hide it from their own people because, if it gets out to one country, it gets out to every country because of social media. So yeah, they hide it from everybody except for a few elitist individuals, which sucks, definitely. Yeah. But if the things that Bob Lazar has claimed to be true are true, and a number of the things that he's claimed have come true, so if the rest of it is true, that we do have alien spacecrafts, that we've established contact with aliens, that they've been interacting with the human race for over 10,000 years, that there is an alien race in Zeta Reticuli only 30 light years away, this, that, and the other, then that is the biggest historical feat in all of human history.
Definitely. And what the fuck are we doing by hiding it?
Yeah.
What the fuck are we doing? Because like I said in the beginning, minds together is better than just working by yourself. So instead of keeping secrets from other countries, why not come together and figure out really what's going on and, give the public what they want to know.
I mean, that's an excellent outlook that accommodates everybody, but unfortunately the people that have these things in their possessions have their own agendas.
Interest.
Financial agendas, political agendas, war-driven agendas, whatever it is.
Mhm.
America, Bob claims, has all of this technology within their grasps. We don't know if, maybe Russia or China or any other country has any of this stuff. So let's assume they don't, and let's keep it to ourselves, because if we have something that can produce anti-gravity and we can produce a force field of gravity in front of us, we're indestructible.
Yeah.
Nothing can
If we
pierce
can
that. A bullet
replicate it,
can't pierce
yeah.
that because it can't get through the gravitational field. A laser, a gun, like nothing can get through that. So you're invincible if you can master and replicate this technology. And we don't know whether or not any other country has this, so we're keeping it to ourselves as a matter of national security, which I understand in concept, but at the same time, if these aliens have been interacting with the human race forever, I feel like that's something that the entirety of the world ought to know.
Yeah.
Especially if there are a number of different alien species, their intentions might vary from species to species. Maybe one of them has aided us in our evolutionary path, added genes to our DNA strands here and there. Maybe some of them have helped us or built the pyramids or whatever, but maybe some of them like to steal our resources. Maybe they like to steal water from the ocean. Maybe some of them see this as a planet that would be cool to colonize, so they want to wipe us out. Like, if there are other species that have established contact here or are so far ahead of us that they have us on their radar and they know that we exist, who's to say that intent isn't malicious for a couple of these?
Yeah.
So it would be within our best interest in terms of security if everybody knew about it. But we're being ignorant and we're being
And
selfish,
selfish.
and so we're
Exactly.
keeping it all to ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's spooky to think about.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But it's something to think about. And I'm really excited to see what kind of evolvements we have in the future regarding
In
this
50
kinds
years,
of things.
when we're older. When
What
we're adults,
other-
when we're old people, what is it going to look like?
Yeah. What other documents the government might be forced to release via the Freedom of Information Act? I'm really excited to see what other kinds of things we might see in the future as a result of
Or
this.
what some random person like us might come across.
Yeah, or
that
another
releases it to the
whistleblower. Who
public.
knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? But I'm just dying to
Very
see
curious.
what new knowledge comes out in
Yeah.
the future. But with that said, let's wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching the Reconsider Reality podcast. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Peace. You got it first try, bro.